Hi there, and welcome to Social Capital Matters. I'm your host, Kylie Taylor. On this show, we take a deep dive into the ideas around social capital by talking to business and industry leaders about how they use it to inspire their stakeholders and build a framework for long-term success. Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Social Capital Matters. We have a great show for you this week, but first I'm joined by my producer Greg in Bangkok. Hey Greg, are you there?
Hey Kylie, I'm here. I'm doing fine. I am really excited to be moving right into this new season of our podcast because we have such a great roster of guests lined up. So that being said, let's get right into it. Can you tell us who we are talking to on this episode?
Sure thing. Today we're talking to Sydney-based Vanessa Gavan. She is the founder and managing director of Maximus International, one of Australia's top leadership development firms. I can't wait to hear what she's got to say, so let's get started. Hi Vanessa, and welcome to Social Capital Matters. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me. Yes, Vanessa Gavan. I'm the founder of a leadership performance consultancy called Maximus, and we really work with many of Australia's medium and large organisations on how to set up their leaders for what's required in the future.
Well, I think this is a very topical area for us today. We live in uncertain and volatile times. Floods, fire, famine, the effects of global warming, global pandemic, and now major global hostilities. Supply chains are disrupted. We've got fast changing consumer and social sentiment. Things are getting really complicated. There's increasing demand for more diversity, equity, and inclusion, while the digital disruption increases in cyber attacks and the rise of the metaverse add even more complexity to everything we're all doing. Now, with all of that going on, the mental load right now for people in organisations is huge. And I think this is something you know a lot about. Your vision is to unlock leaders to become change makers who create performance and impact, leaders who inspire movements. You have said that this is one of the most difficult periods to be a leader, and I couldn't agree more. In this environment, how do you coach leaders to create impact and create change?
Yeah, I think just those things that you've spoken about are examples of why it is one of the most difficult times to lead. And so, if you think about even 10 or 20 years ago, what leaders were dealing with, it's very different to, our environments are volatile, they're very fragmented, fractured. And so the leaders that we're working with they're leading through that. And really what we need to do is make sure that we're equipping them to kind of lead with a really strong sense of purpose, because people don't want to work for organisations where there's not that galvanising sense of being in service for something greater than just pure profit. So they're looking for companies that, are good in their essence and are also performing well. So you need to be able to lead and manage both elements of those dimensions. So when we talk about enabling leaders to, really create change or change the game, come back and think about who in their field does that and what are the elements that they have at their core. And so, when you study these types of people, they have some common elements. There's bold ambition. So they're driven about a big agenda typically. There's a sense of purpose that extends beyond themselves. They're typically really good at something. So we call it spikiness. What is that thing? Like, if you look at people like James Cameron, who I've just recently interviewed, who is a game changer in kind of the film industry, I go, he's really talented at what he does, but he's got a big agenda around purpose and he wants to stand for something more significant than just pure film. His interests are far-reaching in that way. And these people are also, they have the execution to back it up. So they don't just have these big aspirations and these dreams. They back it up with this kind of pursuit of performance and excellence and can rally and take people on a journey. So, if you think about those elements to really change things or to kind of take a business on a different trajectory, you need those elements, But you need to do all of that within the construct of we've got, very changing perceptions and sentiment around, stakeholder and what we think of as a stakeholder these days. So, for those reasons, it is a really complex time to lead. And we've got younger people coming up through our organisations and, picking up some of those leadership batons to take over those roles. I think experienced leaders like me, we really need to think about how we equip them for what the next 2 decades will be like, because they'll be tough.
Yeah. I liked it when you just talked about the stakeholders then, because, we spend a lot of time working with organisations on who are their stakeholders, what are their stakeholders' perceptions, what are their expectations, so we can create that sense of connection. I think listening is a really important skill. And I was wondering if you had any particular tips when you were working with leaders on how they can actually really listen to a conversation or really get out of the conversation. Sometimes it's not what's being said, right? It's what's around it or beneath it or a bigger context. But I'd love to get your view on listening.
I mean, a couple of things I think about when you say that. I don't think we listen enough from what I see. We are operating at a pace that is just, chaotic at times. And so if you think about, what we all experienced during COVID, and we sort of amped up into this efficiency way of operating. And I don't know that we've really, on a whole, come out of that. So we're still running the efficiency. And now it's hybrid, and now we're trying to bring on all of these, more social connections and things like that as, our worlds have opened back up a lot more, and we're bringing on business travel and experiences and all of that. So the pace that we're working at is quite intense, and I think, that's normal in senior leadership roles, but we have to kind of make those decisions around the nuance, around what is really intense, and sort of then where do we have the space for perspective, for letting ideas settle, for really thinking about things, for having clarity to give to our businesses, because we know in this environment we need to give people in our organisations a lot of context, and that does require listening. It requires reading the room, reading the situation, listening. And so I think there's something just in the practice of listening in itself. When someone's speaking to you, have you slowed down? Are you present? Are you actually hearing? Or is it just this cosmetic version of listening that you're waiting to interject, or you're waiting for that next thing to say that it's actually not actually filtering through? And, I just challenge leaders to kind of, observe themselves, because I know myself, I've been trained in these skills as a psychologist, but there's times when I'm not listening, like when I'm just, on to the next thing. And you can see that with someone when that's happening. So I think, it's an art that in this day and age, we all have to continuously work on, that presence. But the perspective is the other part of it, lifting up and being able to not just be running at a million miles an hour, but to kind of build those rhythms and rituals where you are taking the space to kind of gather your thoughts, gather perspective, be clear, provide that clarity to others. So, they'd be my two things around, listening and making sure that people feel like they're being heard.
I'm going to really try and take that advice myself and focus on the slow aspect, because I know when I'm moving too fast, I'm not listening as well as I should be. I think, a little while ago, everyone got into slow cooking, and that was the new thing. I think we'll coin a phrase now, slow listening. And I'll try and practice that, and I'll let you know how it goes. One of the things that I've read in some of the work you've done is the imperative for organisations to achieve growth, joy, and a sense of thriving in organisations. Now, that all really appeals to me. We want people at work to have a sense of growth, joy, and thriving. I'd like to hear more about that from you, and examples of how you've seen organisations or people achieve that. And especially, how do you get that when we're a bit distributed, we're a bit work from home, we're a bit at the office, we're hybrid, we're all in on different days. But I think that the concept is definitely a kind of workplace nirvana that if we could achieve would be really great.
Yeah, I think having an environment where people thrive starts at its core in terms of making sure you've created a sense of community and people feel like they belong. So if I think about our work with Zoomers and millennials, the difference between your younger people in the workforce is they just won't trade that off. They're coming and they're looking for that in their workplaces. Whereas I think about when, I'm a Gen X, and when I first went into the workforce, it was very much get in, find your feet, find something that you're really good at and build that career path. So I think for us to kind of appeal to the needs of all generations, you need to make sure that you are building these communities where people feel connected and they feel like they're connected with a sense of creativity and joy in what they're experiencing from work. And, given that it's a hybrid environment, you've got to be able to do that both digitally and physically. And I think you go back to simple, I go back to simple rules here. Like when people feel like they belong, they feel like they're aligned, so they're clear on the direction, they know where everything's heading, they know what's important, they've got context, they're given the opportunity for contribution into decisions and things that are being discussed, but they also feel like they've got affinity with other people around them, and that's how you build that kind of sense of cohesion and, connection in your communities. So, that might be, we do quite simple things in here. We do a lot around food, getting people to eat together. My business partner the other week came in and cooked breakfast for everybody because there was a lot on, and it was just that process of knowing that, if everybody feels like you've come in, and it's like those simple acts that actually create a sense. And if you just go back to basics of how you think about that happening in your own family environment or your own community, we connect over food, we connect over stories, we connect over shared experiences. That can be digital or physical, but it just needs to be there.
Flatter structures are something that I hear a lot about at the moment. I've always been a fan of a flat structure and a fairly non-hierarchical workplace. What are you seeing at the moment in terms of structures changing as we come out of COVID and work to meet the demands of the new workforce? Are structures getting flatter in organisations?
Well, I think there is a natural flattening of structures at the moment that we are seeing, but it's not just purely coming out of COVID and hybrid working. It's also the economic pressures are really having a role to play in this. So as you're seeing businesses, they're really looking to optimise the value from every role. They are looking to open up accessibility because obviously that helps with clarity, perspective, accessibility to drive outcomes. So that is where sort of that flattening of structures is coming from. Just the cost base that businesses need to get into, and the ease of actually achieving outcomes in flatter structures. And if you think about it, it's also, the way the world is moving. Like we're moving away from these, imposed hierarchical structures and boundaries, and it's, globalization has made for a more open work environment where they're not needed in the same way. So if you think about where those things came from, they very much came out of industrial ways of management and working, where we needed to confine things and put boundaries around them so you could compartmentalize. Whereas if you think about the way that work is happening now, it's through networks and ecosystems, and, there's an opening up of these boundaries that enable modern ways of working, and, technology plays a huge role in that. So, I think they're all the reasons that you're seeing a flattening, seeing more open environments, more networked environments, the huge rise of ecosystem and how that's being used in businesses for them to tap into different types of talent that doesn't need to always be on.
Yeah.
And I think they're really important practices to build into the way that you're leading and working.
From a communications point of view, this flattening structures and ecosystems that you're talking about has just created an explosion of opportunities that probably came along with the social networking platforms as well. But the way in organizations now we can structure internal campaigns, whether they're education campaigns or alignment type of campaigns, to communicate across a workforce and not get two-way feedback, but multi-way conversations going right throughout organizations, is so different to work I was doing 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The whole idea that we had internal communications that was, oh, is it going to be top down or bottom up? I mean, everything's upside down, roundabout, sideways, every which way now. And it is creating a much, much richer environment. And I'm sure you see that all the time as well.
Absolutely. If I think about communication and how it used to work, it was very much hardwired, top down. You know, there was a real method to how you would roll out messages. And whilst I think, you know, there was a time and a place for that, and in some ways that made sure that, you know, people were getting those messages hardwired through, it wasn't as authentic or organic as the way we communicate now. So, you know, what people are looking for in modern workplaces is just this kind of authentic, kind of natural way of engaging, the ability to kind of have two-way, to impart ideas, to have suggestions, to kind of evolve those conversations. So I think that's what our social tools. So if you think about mindset and then toolkit, the mindset has changed, that we want a different kind of engagement and a different kind of conversation, and we want more open, we want it to be more transparent, we want it to be more authentic. But at the same time, you know, we've got this incredible portfolio of digital tools that now just completely provide the tool set for all of that to happen. So, you know, we've done incredible things where you're really driving culture change across really large-scaled organisations. We did something a couple of years ago with one of the big banks where it was a whole social movement all around basic human behaviours and this kind of concept of kind of paying it forward and getting people to kind of really value just those simple connected moments that individuals can have. And we had, you know, within a couple of weeks, 11,000 people kind of connecting and contributing and doing these behaviours. And that wouldn't have been something that people could do 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
No, it's incredibly powerful and incredibly exciting. You talk a lot about purpose, and, you know, there's no denying that leaders that can engage people in a sense of purpose and align them around that purpose have a really powerful tool to move their organisation and their goals forward. Any suggestions from you for people or organisations who are at the beginning of this sort of journey and they're working out their purpose and their direction? Do you have any tips on how to get started or how to start thinking about your purpose with your leadership team to put something in place? I know I've often said, you know, as consultants, we're not going to come in and tell you your purpose. It's got to come from within you as an organisation and from yourselves and your people. Do you have any tips for people listening about how to start on a purpose journey?
When it comes to purpose, there's two important things to think about. The first one is individual purpose and the journey that someone may need to go on to kind of capture what they deeply care about, and that kind of sense of, you know, I talk about it in terms of being the fire within, that thing that they're deeply passionate about and what they want to contribute to in, you know, or be in service of. And then the second sign of that is the company purpose. And I think it's important not to get the two mixed up, because the company purpose, people want to work for a company that is in service of something, as I said, beyond just pure financial returns. They want to know that it's having an impact, you know, to everyone's careers inside that organisation, and that requires a certain financial performance. But they also want to know that it's impacting communities, the planet, that it's, you know, that it's leaving a positive mark on the world. When it comes to individual purpose, individual purpose needs to be able to connect up and ladder up to that company purpose, but it's deeply introspective in its nature. So my advice for an individual starting on that journey is to recognize that it's a deeply introspective approach, that getting to your why, what you fundamentally care about most, requires digging deep and really going beyond, a lot of the assessments and the, psychological assessments and tools that you might have used before, and really thinking about what's most important to you in your life. And, the work that we do a lot of work where we start going back into backstory. What were the values that you formed growing up? What were some of your experiences? Right. What do you remember in those younger or teenage years or your first career roles that was really important, and how do they kind of shape a part of your identity and how you see yourself? And once you have a sense of that, then you can kind of really capture and say, okay, so what does this mean in terms of how do I come string that together and really think about what that means in terms of what I really want to contribute to as part of my life's work and my contribution, not just to work, but in my broader life holistically. And so I think that's very important. And then on the work side, I think for a company that's starting to go through that journey, I think very much like a founder like this, it's got to be original, it's got to be unique, you've got to find the right space. Yep. It can't come purely from the head. A great strategy can be produced in the mind, but purpose has to also be produced in the heart.
I like your starting with the personal and connecting the personal to the company and creating that alignment, because, I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm thinking of examples of that in our own firm, and I can see it when it happens, how productive it can be for the person and for the organisation when that is aligned so incredibly well. I wanted to talk a little bit about stakeholders. We all talk about, meeting the needs of all stakeholders, but we know that organisations are complex and they have many different stakeholders, and there's often a tension between the different stakeholders and what they need. Is it possible to meet the needs of all stakeholders, or do you think it's a matter of picking and choosing which ones are most important and really winning with those stakeholders and doing the best you can with those? Or is it possible to really take into account all your stakeholder needs?
That's where I started the conversation in terms of saying it's one of the most complex times to lead, because I think modern leadership, there's no choice but to appeal to all stakeholders. No one's going to be happy working for or investing in, if you're an investor, in a company that is purely in service of itself in this modern day and age. It's just not going to work. Equally, the same applies for a company that does amazing things in terms of community, environment, has a wonderful kind of position on ESG and all things that are important socially, but can't rally the efforts inside the organisation to perform and provide, the right assurance and security and opportunity for the people within its care. So from that perspective, you have to be able to do both. And that means you've got to be able to run those dynamics in tandem, and you've got to be able to think long-term and short-term and play out, second and third order consequences in terms of the decisions you make, because there are tensions there. There's natural tensions there that you're constantly having to kind of reconcile and work through. And this is just, one of the examples of a tension in modern leadership that has to be able to be straddled well.
Yep. You mentioned before about younger employees and the younger generation and managing the younger generation. Now, I think you and I are both quite expert at Gen Z. We're both parents of Gen Zs, so we should be expert at dealing with the next generation coming through the workforce. What are you seeing in terms of how workplaces are adapting, or indeed how you're adapting the work you're doing with companies to be more relevant to the expectations of the next generation?
Yeah. So let's start with, why is there so much noise around Gen Z and millennials? And it is because some of the attitudes are very different. and they're looking for and advocating for something that is quite different. So, what are the known aspects in terms of, particularly Zoomers and our younger people entering the workforce? We know that they're smart. They've grown up in an incredible education system. They've had access to, whatever information they need. So they come into the workplace having had a lot of pressure. As we think about our children, they've gone through, and there's a lot of pressure on these kids coming through. And so they come into the workplace smart, full of ideas, expecting kind of a rapid, run in terms of these opportunities and careers. They've also grown up in an age where, I grew up, and if you call someone's home, it was hello, Mr. and Mrs. We don't have this. We've taken down a lot of these kind of rituals around authority. Our societies, are less kind of geared towards authority. So they're happy to challenge. They're happy to say what they think, express their ideas, and, as leaders kind of stewarding these people through our organisations, there's an element that we have to embrace some of that, because we've been in our homes creating this with our, people that we've raised.
Yes.
They're very driven by purpose. Purpose is that they're raised in school to know, to care for things beyond themselves, They have access to things that we never had access to see and hear and know about. So they have opinions on these things beyond, just issues around climate, which they will inherit, but things like, social justice and, what's right in terms of what's happening. And I think these things, if we don't foster depth of thinking and perspective and wisdom, they're very clever skills, but they can become dangerous without a balance of information, right? So I think they're driven by purpose, but I think we have a role to play when we're bringing these young people into our organisations and through into the leadership ranks to help them connect with what that purpose is, because there's a sense there, but do they know deeply what they want to be in service of? Often not yet. They're coming to that. They're evolving to that, but they know they want to find it.
Yeah.
They're impatient. We know that, I said they're impatient.
Yep. Yeah.
And, there's a lot of talk around, are they gritty enough and things like that. And I think here we have to take some responsibility. I look at my own children, I go, we talk about the helicopter parenting era, right? They're driven around everywhere. They're dropped everywhere. They're kind of looked after through love and attentiveness, which is amazing.
Yes.
But I also think, then we bring them into the workforce and say, why aren't they more resilient? And I think, it's the wrong question. The question is, how do we actually bring the wisdom of people that have navigated organisations and our industries through really tricky times and have the conversation with our young people? You will be the leaders in the next 10 years. You will be the people running our companies. You will be the people taking these businesses into their next horizons. And therefore, what do you need? What do you need to know? What do you need to understand? What exposure do you need to have access to? So my position on young people is I think we need to be really good stewards of the next generations. And I think we need to pay some of the things forward that we've had access to. I myself have had some incredibly good mentors, people that lent into me, people that I learned things from, people that probably didn't even realise it at the time that I've been working alongside, and just, absolutely absorbing incredible depth of wisdom and insight from. And I think we need to be that to young people. We need to have a commitment to the mentorship that is going to set up our businesses and make sure we've got strong industries in 10 years' time.
I think that's a really healthy perspective that you've just shared with us then on it's easy to whinge about Gen Zs and whinge about their entitledness, but I think you've just given us a really good context on it. I really want to draw on your psychology training, because I think there is such a place for psychology in the workplace, and clearly you've built a business around bringing that organizational psychology into really practical tools to help people. One of the more depressing things about the workforce today is I keep seeing statistics around bullying and harassment, and a sort of psychological warfare that goes on in the world today. Recently, the Committee for Economic Development of the Productivity Commission found psychological and psychosocial injury cost the Australian economy $12 billion or $39 billion a year. And what we're actually talking about is fundamentally poor workplace relationships, and that's bullying, harassment, interpersonal conflict, and unreasonable work behaviours. A whole range of industries were in that study, so it's not like specific to to manufacturing or work sites or anything like that. I'd just love to get your view about what is going on with those kinds of behaviours, and how can this be addressed? I mean, as people running organisations and in leadership teams that are probably listening to this, how can they be more attuned and more alert to these sorts of issues in their workplace, and what can they do about it?
It's a complex issue. I think if you just have to look at the World Health Stats. This is not purely an Australian problem. We have a problem around the world that people are feeling less well and less healthy than what they have. And, if you think about some of the context that you shared at the beginning of our discussion, just in terms of all the complexities and some of the divides that we're seeing going on around the world, the status of where we're at in terms of, the planet and how people feel about what's being done. This is where some of these big macro kind of thrusts are really playing a role in societies feeling, less positive about the future and less positive about what they're seeing. And I think you really see it a lot in young people when you have really honest, authentic conversations with them about how they're feeling about things. And then, you add to that, you just have to pick up, our phone, and it's, a huge distraction device, but also like it's in your hand. And, for young people, it's giving them that comparison point to everybody else around them. And, there's a bit of an unhealthy economy that kind of exists there in terms of, the shoulds, or kind of what people think is normal life. That's not always normal life. So my view on this, in speaking to, I guess, leaders that are trying to create really constructive, positive cultures, this may be the way I'll answer you. It's getting back to the basics of do you know who your people are? Do you have good, substantial, authentic relationships with them? Do you have regular check-ins where you're kind of getting a sense of how people are feeling? Do you have, and it's probably, I'm going to say the word psychological safety. I think it's one of the most misunderstood words in business. So to me, psychological safety is an environment where people can be themselves, where they can speak up, where they can have agency and a perspective over how they can work and how they can thrive. It is not keeping everything safe and not having any constructive debate or challenge. And I think that's really important to understand. But I think, you want to create that sense of I can have some agency over how I work and how I show up. And, therefore, I know last year in 2022, there was a lot of burnout that came post-COVID. We talked about just how people were feeling it over that period of time. People being able to take some agency over that and saying, I need to kind of put some things in place to look after myself a bit better is really important. So I think making sure in your environments that you have that openness to your culture, you have managers and leaders that are in good practices of checking in with their people. You have people that have the skills to have agency for themselves as well, which is really important. They're all the basics that you want to have in place. But, there's a reason why we've just reviewed our laws for this, because, it's clearly a problem that is escalating, and we've got to be careful that, we still want healthy, constructive cultures.
Yeah.
So we've got to be careful about how we walk this dance and make sure that, we're still having performance-focused cultures. We're building positive cultures, but we want to make sure that people are well in those cultures as well.
Yeah. So we can still have constructive debate of ideas and do that in a way that's respectful and helpful and doesn't tear people down.
We talk about high care, high challenge. That's our mantra in terms of, we get taken into a lot of corporate environments around building high performance.
Yeah.
And the principles that we work to is really understand people, know what they're capable of, really lean in, show them that you build the relationship, show them that you care, show them that you've got consideration for them as a person beyond just the role they do at work. And then you've got the basis to challenge properly. So if you've got all of those things in place and they know your intentions are to get the best of them, to take them to their best and to, enrich their performance, then challenge is just a part of how you do that.
Yeah. Listening to you say that, it's actually great advice for all relationships in life, whether they're your family relationships, your children relationships, your workplace relationships. I really like your high care, high challenge. It's a good mantra.
Well, nothing good comes from artificial harmony.
Yes.
If you even think about our home relationships, right? When everything's all fine on the surface, but we don't really talk about anything that's a bit tricky or a thorny issue, we just exist in this artificial sense of harmony that's not really genuine or authentic. So I think, to really get the best out of relationships, there's got to be a little bit of challenge in there.
Yeah.
You've got to be making each other better.
Before we run out of time, at the end of our podcast, we always ask our guests if they've got a final comment or word that they'd like to share with the listeners. Any final takeaways that you feel inspired to share today around these topics?
I think I'd come back to my principle here on mentoring.
Okay.
And I think, if we kind of think about what are we here in service of, and if we go with the principle that everybody's here in terms of playing a role to leave things better than what we found them, part of that is not just what you personally do and what you personally contribute to. It's actually the legacy of others that you leave to take that beyond you. And I think one of the most important things that I'm focused on at the moment is just, how do you actually give that out? How do you pay that forward? How do you actually make sure you're playing a role in terms of making others better and leaving things better because of the role that you've played there?
You've been very generous with your time today and your thoughts and sharing this with us. So I think you've paid it forward for everyone listening, that they would have learned something new and got a new insight from this discussion. So thank you so much, Vanessa Gavan, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, Greg, I really found Vanessa's background in psychology gives her unique insights and a powerful perspective. It's true that people want to work for companies that are in service of more than just profit. We see that all the time. They want a sense of community at work, they want to make a contribution, and they're increasingly working in a networked ecosystem.
Right. It's everywhere. I like what she said about the need to go back to basics and just create those human connections that will deliver these things. It's such a simple idea, but it's so powerful. And that's a really clear and simple proposition.
Her challenge to make others better was I think, a really great point to that she said towards the end there. Her challenge was to make others better and leave better behind. It's really something we can think about. And how can communications help foster a workplace where cultures and people live and breathe that? I just think it's a really interesting challenge. Make others better and leave better behind.
Yeah, that'd be a good T-shirt,
Yeah,
yeah. She was talking about Gen Zs and Millennials too, which I think is something that all of us hear about a lot. I like what she said about it, about how they get a lot of criticism but there's actually a lot of talent and potential there to mine if you do it right. They're going to be the leaders of tomorrow, whether we like it or not. So we can either keep scapegoating them and talking about them, or we can learn to give them the skills they need to move things forward, which I think will just help everyone.
I agree. Thanks for listening, everyone. Make sure to check out the other episodes in our series. We've got great conversations with some of the brightest minds out there discussing the important issues in the world of social capital. See you next time.
Social Capital Matters has been a production of Baldwin Boyle Group, hosted by Kylie Taylor and produced and edited by Greg Jorgensen. Find more episodes in our ongoing series on baldwinboyle.com/podcasts, watch on YouTube, or listen wherever you find your podcasts.